Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, How to Run a Life Science Company in China. My name is Ting Zhang. I'm your host today. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping matters. The formal presentation will take 40 minutes in total and then 5 minutes question time. Anytime during the webinar, if you have a question, please feel free to send it through the Q&A tab, which you can see on the panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll be taking your questions at the end of the presentation. So now let me quickly introduce Crayfish for those who are new to us. So Crayfish provides expertise for your multilingual business needs, whether it's translation or marketing or supply chain. We also provide the connections to facilitate cross-border collaborations, especially for doing business with China. And then we also help to access the funding that you need to bring your business to China. So whether you choose to do online through our marketplace, which we have built with a tailored system to handle all transactions in a seamless way, or you can talk to us, and for tailored projects, we can deliver to your needs. So we also help those companies who have limited budget and wanted to take very specific fixed price projects. So that's enough for Crayfish. And now I would like to kick things off by welcoming our speaker for today, Qun Yang, the co-CEO of BIORBYT Limited. So over to you, Qun.
Hi, thank you, Ting. Thank you for inviting me today for this webcast. So my name is Qun Yang, and I originally from China, graduated from Shanghai University of Finance and Economics in 1998, and came to the UK in 1999 to study for a course Masters in Finance and Economics, and then stayed in the UK ever since. In 2001, I joined Deloitte as an auditor, and I'm qualified as an ACA qualified accountant. And then from 2005, I moved to Goldman Sachs in the city, later Deutsche Bank. So I have accounting and finance experience. In 2011, I co-founded a Cambridge-based biotech company, BIORBYT. So a bit introduction of BIORBYT. BIORBYT was incorporated into end of 2010. And what do we do? We manufacture and sell research-used reagents to the life science communities, including universities, research institutions, pharmaceutical companies, and biotech companies. Through our expansion, we set up a subsidiary in San Francisco in 2012. And then the year after, in 2013, we established an office in Wuhan, China, with a local partner who has very extensive knowledge of the local business environment. So yeah, so we moved into China quite quickly. And in 2018, we actually acquired the shares from the local partners and turned the Wuhan office into a fully owned subsidiaries. So why is China's strategy so important? We actually very early on set up office in China. I want to show you some very simple numbers. We look at the populations, everybody talk about the populations. You can see China has 1.4 billion people, and US 331 million, and UK 67 million people. So the scale of China is very different. And that leads to the growth of China's middle class is really transforming the nation. I have some data from McKinsey, and that indicates kind of for last 20 years, the middle class has grown substantially, especially some upper middle class is forecast going to be 54% of the whole population. And what does that mean? I think, the purchasing power, the people demand for better quality of services. We can see another slides again. What the kind of upper middle class is defined between 60K to 34K in US dollar terms, and it's estimated by 2025, 180 million of Chinese households gonna be in that bracket. That is a double of the population in the UK. So China really is a market you can't underestimate. Because we are in the life science business, so I want to talk about the R&D spending in globally, but particularly in China. And you can see this data is from 1981 to 2013. US is still leading the global spending in R&D. However, you can see China is catching up very quickly. I haven't got the recent data, but I think that probably has already overtaken the EU. We just look at some country-specific data. So United States, the R&D spending is 2.7% of the GDP, and in the absolute terms is $476 million. And most of the R&D spending come from business, government, universities, and some private non-profit organizations. Let's look at China. So China, the R&D spending accounts for 2% of the GDP, and in absolute terms, 370 million. So it's almost close to the R&D spending in the US. And you can see the business and the government and university are playing crucial roles in the R&D space. What's the data looks like in the UK? UK actually is doing well, 1.7% of the GDP spent in R&D, but in the absolute term is about 44 million US dollars spent in R&D. Hence, this data actually meets to the distribution of our sales data, which indicate the data we have actually is the US is our biggest market, and followed by Europe, and then China is catching up. So is that easy to do business in China? I looked at some data. Actually, probably surprisingly, China is ranked 31 among the 190 economics in how easy to do business with China. So, don't be afraid to go into China. It has improved enormously, I think, since last 10 to 20 years. But there are lots of challenges in doing business with China. So I want to talk about some aspects we encountered. I listed a few of the challenges we faced here: culture and language barriers, administration barriers, reporting, government policy and regulations, HR management, cost of acquiring customers, competition from the Chinese local market, and IP protections. There are obviously more things to consider. Before I carry on, I want to have a very quick quiz to see how much you know about China. So I wonder if you know how many dialects are spoken in China. And the answer is 297. How many provinces are there in China? 34. Do you know what is the time difference between the UK and China? So it's 8 hours in winter and 7 hours in summer. Do you know how fast it takes to get from Beijing to Shanghai by the fastest train? Currently, it's 4 hours, 28 minutes, and I heard it will be increased to 3 hours and 15 minutes. What's the most used communication app in China? I think most people probably know. It's WeChat, but actually young generations like to use QQ. Do you know what's the corporation tax rate in China? It actually varies from 10% to 25%, depending on what type of business you're operating. So I think that gives you a bit idea how, you know, there's the scope of complications in dealing with China. So I want to now focus on some of the challenges in China BIORBYT has faced. I would like to first talk about the HR issues because people are very important when you run a business in another country. First of all, it can be quite hard to find people with local knowledge and can speak very good English. You can find people who speak good English, but may not be good at the science or with local knowledge, or vice versa. And often people think it's cheap to operate business in China. You might be surprised to know employees with desirable skills actually demand premium salaries. Some of the finance managers in Shanghai, their yearly salary can easily reach 50K or more. Chinese employment law can be complicated. For example, employers can be responsible for injuries of employees happened on the way to work. So it's not just injury at work. How are you gonna cope with that? And you do need to understand the requirement of the local laws. And finally, I want to point out, actually the national insurance is quite high in China. The national insurance is breaking down, we call it 五险一金 in Chinese. That means 5 different types of national insurance and 1 fund. I have listed out the details here. So you can see the pension, medical insurance, unemployment insurance, employment injury insurance, maternity insurance, and finally, you also need to provide housing provision fund to your employees. This example is the number from Beijing in 2019, and that totals to 44.8%. That the percentage actually varies from city to city, so you better to check which city you will operate your business at. And communication. You will be so surprised at how many things got lost in translations. We do speak different languages, and sometimes people do misunderstand each other. And we also use different communication softwares. Why that can cause problem? Because your employees in China may use the local communication software to discuss the issue. And your employees in the UK actually were not aware of the communications. So the information flow is not really facilitated between 2 channels. And do you know the Chinese employees actually expect the company to organize an employee group holidays at least once a year? They like to go on holiday together. And I know my UK employees will hate that if you say, let's go on holiday together with all the colleagues. And you do need to manage the expectation of the Chinese employee, right? Because they may expect 13 months salaries. So when you negotiate salaries on a monthly basis with them, be sure, make it clear. And often people underestimate how many holidays there is in China. So I just looked it up. In 2020, the national bank holiday amount to 30 days, with 10 days break for Chinese New Year and 8 days for National Day. And that does cause some logistic problem for my company, because during the Chinese New Year time, the business still operating as usual outside of China. However, you actually, if you're waiting for products being sent out from China, or if you need to send things to China, you can't. Everybody's on holiday, so you have to deal with that. And finally, don't forget, we are at different time zone. So you will need to get up early, or one of your employees need to get up earlier to have a telephone conference with China. So all those things you do need to bear in mind when you run an office or operation in another country. And I would like to talk some administration burdens. What really surprised me, even though I was born in China, raised in China, but when I went back to do business in China, the amount of paperwork you need to deal with. I was asked to make all those stamps, the company's stamps, the legal representative stamps, the stamps for the financial controllers. So in my handbags, actually, it was so heavy. I had to carry all those stamps to go to the bank. When you go to the banks, they'll ask you to stamp. Your signature doesn't count. When you go to the tax bureau, you need to have the stamps. So stamp, yeah, it did drive me crazy at the time. But I guess you get used to it, and you need to be aware there's lots of paperwork to do. And I guess it's the way, how people do things, it can be different from how the way you are used to. And that, so that leads to, you will deal with some regulatory reporting tasks which are not online or paperless. So in the UK, when I send my VAT returns, my yearly annual reports, I can just do it online. I don't think I ever met someone from HMRC. However, in China, you have to file those on the paper, and you often need to send an employee to go to those tax bureaus, go to the banks, go to the importing and exporting bureaus to deal with lots of paperwork. Because there were, once I called the office and I asked, is my financial controller there? They said, no, she went to the bank. I said, why is she always going to the bank? But that's the reality. They just need to spend lots of time to go to those different bureaus. A website, if your website is not hosted in China, you will experience some delays in accessing your website from China because of the firewall. So if the speed of your website is important for you, you should consider to have a local server in China. And that actually can be quite expensive. And you will need to run 2 versions of your website, probably one in English and one in Chinese. And emails, Google Mail is not supported in China. So if your company's email system is provided by Google, you can't access your company email when you are in China. So you will need to use the local Chinese system. And some of the softwares you are very familiar with may not be supported in China. We're using QuickBooks, Dropbox, Magento, Salesforce, etc. Those are actually not widely used in China. So we had to literally set up the complete new system, internal system to support everything in China. Those sort of things can really slow down your expansion in China. So you do really need to know, you need to have the local knowledge and the people there to help you to go through all these hurdles. And market access and competition. I think you shouldn't be naive you will be surprised how fierce the local competition can be. Often people just think China is a big cake to you can go there and have your share, and there's really quite lots of competition. I think the brands which are made in Europe or outside of China have been preferred for a long time. However, that sentiment is changing. The Chinese people actually now support the brand made in China more and more because of the increasing of national pride. And China is not a homogeneous country. As we mentioned before, there's 34 provinces in China. Each of them speaks different local dialect. They have different mentalities. So you need to know which province you are approaching, where's your market, where you should be located. It is much more complicated. And for the market access, you do need to consider, should you sell directly or do you work with local distributors? What is your online strategy and what's your offline strategy? They both have their own merits. Working with local distributors will enable your products to reach those provinces very quickly. But you do depend on if they will favor your products over your competitors' products. Online strategy is very different in China. You don't use the Google keywords, so you need to think how to use Baidu, for example, to promote your products online. And offline strategy, what kind of conference can you go to? Who are your key customers? How do I identify those key customers? That I think you do need to do some homework or find people who has the local marketing knowledge to help you. I put it there, yeah, Amazon cannot even get right in China. It shows you the competition from the local businesses is really fierce. You know, Alibaba has been very strong, Jingdong has been very strong in that, that space. A question I often been asked is, can money be transferred out from China? Yes, it can be transferred out, but you do need to have legitimate reasons, and there are lots of paperwork to be dealt with. So you need to have your team to go to the Importing Exporting Bureau, the Foreign Exchange Bureau, to get the paperwork right. Trademarks and IP protections, that's extremely important. You probably will be surprised to know Apple even lost the trademark dispute in China because some small manufacturer registered iPhone name long time ago. However, the situation actually has improved, and I read a paper, a research paper on the Harvard Business Review. It's argued the IP practice in China is not actually as bad as people perceived. So it is important for you to work with local lawyers to protect your trademarks and your intellectual properties. You probably better do that before you enter the Chinese market. I'm not the expert in this aspect, so I wouldn't spend too much time. But when we enter the China, we make sure our brand has been trademarked and our IP has been protected. So the key steps to enter China, I think if you consider to enter China, you should conduct the market research thoroughly, identify your market segment, and understand the relevant government policies and the regulations. Choose a good location. What's the right location for you? How you're gonna hire your staff, your employees, and develop intellectual property strategies. And I would recommend you to work with local partners if you can find one. This is a slide I saw by another company. I thought it's quite useful. So this lists out the advantages and disadvantages of different investment vehicle into China. You can have rep office, you can have a joint venture, you can have a wholly owned foreign entities in China. So I'm not going through all the details, but for BIORBYT, we kind of had a joint venture. So we had a local partner who had 25% of shares of the company. And the person who had lots of local knowledges and helped with hiring the employees, maintain the relationship with the local authorities, etc. So that has been very useful. And for us, we felt just have a representative office is not enough. We feel the Chinese market is really important for us. So hence we established a full-run office there, hired, grow the business, hired employees, had the research lab, etc. I guess you have to decide on in your circumstance. Well, I think it's interesting to look at some of the cities in China, because China is a very big country. So you know, when you go into China, you do need to think, where should you set up your office? Often people think about Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Jiangsu, Shandong now is popular as well. And I put Wuhan there. I added Wuhan onto the list. And each cities have some preference to different industries. For example, Wuhan has lots of biotech companies, and traditionally they have automotive industries and optical cables industries in Wuhan. And Shanghai or Hong Kong, if you want to run a finance service companies, those probably a good location. And Beijing is generally good for IT. And if you want to be close to the central government, then Beijing will be a good location. So I listed some of the key cities here for your reference. The location assessment for BIORBYT, we visited 3 cities, Shanghai, Suzhou, and Wuhan. And each of those cities have specific science parks in biotech. In Shanghai, it's called the Zhangjiang. Suzhou is called the BioBay. In Wuhan, it's called the BioLake. And what we noticed, Zhangjiang mostly is the very large enterprise are located in Shanghai. And Suzhou, they are large enterprises, large companies, but also quite a lot of SMEs. And in Wuhan at the time when we were there, mostly SMEs. And we also looked at the cost of hiring. Obviously, Shanghai is, you do need to pay higher salaries because the living cost is high in Shanghai. Suzhou is a city which is quite close to Shanghai. I think it takes probably 20 or 30 minutes by train to Shanghai. So the salary there is kind of medium. Wuhan, compared to Shanghai and Suzhou, the cost is relatively lower. And we also looked at how easy to access the English-speaking professionals and how easy to recruit bioscientists. In Shanghai, yes, it's quite easy to find those people. In Wuhan, it's relatively harder. However, because Wuhan has lots of universities, so you actually can find a good scientist there. And identifying local business partners was very important for us. And we had a local partner in Wuhan, and that was almost a deciding factor for us. So to summarize, why is BIORBYT located in Wuhan? Geographically, Wuhan is located in the center of China, so it's very easy to get to other cities. Wuhan has 82 universities. It was ranked number 2 in China. And the salary, as I mentioned, is relatively lower. Wuhan has established a biotech ecosystem, and we have a trusted local partner in Wuhan. And the local government also have some incentives to attract high-tech companies to the region. So I'm not an ambassador for Wuhan. I'm just kind of share you our thinking process, why at the time we choose Wuhan. So, so I generally think BIORBYT has been quite successful in China. We have grown our sales from 5% of our total revenue to 20% of our total revenue by having a direct presence in China. We now establish manufacturing facilities in China to support the expansion in our product line. We have a well-established distributor network in most of provinces in China. We can now have a direct meeting with customers by the local sales force in China. And we regularly attend the industrial-focused conference in China that helped enormously to raise our profile in China. Do we have I mean, I talked about some challenges, and yeah, there's still things you do need to, you know, watch out. Like, for example, we had people pretend to be a bank, called our employees and ask us to transfer money to them, you know, so you need to watch out those kind of fraud, but that happens in any cities and countries. We had some challenges in dealing with the logistics to send the goods in and the goods out. Obviously, we have biological goods. There are much more paperwork to deal with, and to transfer the money into China and out of China. So it takes time, but once you sort it out, I think it's rewarding. So finally, 5 top tips for doing business with China. 1, localization. You need local people there to help you to run the business. 2, you are either all in or you're out. If China's strategy is important for you, you should take it very seriously. Number 3, a strong distribution network. You have to branch out in China. It is a big country, and there's lots of ground to cover. Number 4, beware of the intellectual property issue, but don't let it put you off. And finally, you should identify a base and get going.
Right. Thank you very much, Jun. So that is amazing story of your business. So now we're going to have a Q&A session. While we have the questions coming through, I will then take a couple minutes to introduce about Crayfish services. So we have services that actually can help you all the way through the different stages, as Jun mentioned in her own business, you know, from market research to work out a strategy, to protect your IP, to find a partner, set up the office, and also optimize your supply chain, as well as actually finding the information about your important partners. And here we would like to talk about Crayfish Accelerator very briefly, which is a China-ready program where we combine the access to early-stage equity funding with a hand-holding service that will typically very much in need by the startups when they first set up in China. And we have covered so far medical device, advanced manufacturing, new materials, as well as IoT and semiconductor. So companies typically need to have a prototype ready. So that's for this. And now we are going to take a question. Okay, so now the first question we have got is, how important is government relationship for foreign SMEs in China in your own experience?
Okay, I think, yeah, the government relationship always is important in China. You are in their country, you do need to understand the local regulations. I have to say, I think the Chinese government has improved dramatically. They become more and more efficient. I remember some people say it used to take like a month to even just set up an office in China. Now, it can just take a day to do that. But if you have a good government relationship, they will invite you to their, their programs, and you may be able to even access the fundings. Government actually have some funding incentives for SMEs in China, so be able to know that is quite helpful. And generally, I think for any business, have a local partner to know the regulations and the laws there is quite important.
Okay, that's great. So you actually also answered another question which just came through about what's about funding in China. So you mentioned this government funding. What's your experience in terms of access to funding in China, if you have any?
Okay, so yes, funding can be from different channels. The Chinese government tend to want to attract a good science into the region. So if you have very good scientists in your team or your company, they would give you some incentives. For example, they offered us the lab and the office free of rent for 1 year. That was very helpful, and they encouraged us to apply for a status called high-tech business in China. That enabled us to reduce our corporation tax rate. I think it was to 15%. And they also, there's certain fundings available. You just need to know what type of funding from the government and to talk to them. Sometimes it could up to 100K. I know in some regions they 500,000 is possible, but you do need to talk to them, know what's available there. And then there is obviously private funding. We, as I mentioned, we had a local partner in Wuhan, and she actually put money into our business. We didn't really look for private funding at the time. It's more just so we have a common interest. I think it's important for you to find the strategic partners in China, not just for the sake of money. Obviously, money helps. So ideally, they have the local expertise and the distribution channels to help you to grow your business in China. I think that would be preferred. You could talk to local banks. To be honest, we haven't really tried because we do have quite good cash flows. But I'm sure any banks, if your business is sound, there is a possibility for them to provide like bank loan to you as well.
That's very helpful. Thank you to cover all aspects of possibilities to access funding in China. So there's another question, which is the final one we're going to take because we're running short of time. This one specifically asks about your opinion about Wuhan. So it says, how has the coronavirus outbreak affected your business in China, especially Wuhan, and any tips for others?
So yes, it has affected my business in Wuhan. Obviously, the office is in Wuhan. But you deal with it, and all my employees now work from home, so they couldn't really access the office, but it doesn't mean they can't do the work. We have lots of works which are research related.
Mm-hmm.
So some employees are based at home, they're doing lots of literature review, they're actually doing lots of research around this coronavirus. We are designing the immune sequence for that. And also they have been talking to our customers to understanding the need of the customers via telephone calls. Because we, at the beginning of this outbreak, we actually donated some the virus-related antibodies to the researchers in China. And that was, we had lots of demands for that. So so the employees actually been coordinating that. And we also work with the distributors in other cities, a distributor in Shanghai. They've been helping us to facilitate importing into China. I guess you just have to see what you can do about it. And I'm actually quite pleased the Chinese government is taking quite strong measures to stop the spread of the virus. So hopefully we will soon see Wuhan will be open again.
Let's hope so. Thank you again so much, Chen, for coming in today and share your story and your observations and insight into the Chinese market, in particularly the life science. It's really helpful. Thank you. So now, just to quickly, we do have 2 webinars coming up, and one is on engaging China digitally. The other is again on life science biotech, but it's more about general the market landscape of that. And today, if you want to access this webinar again, it will be available on our YouTube channel later, and a video link will also be sent to you through the emails. So for those whose questions have not been answered today, we will email you with answer from Chen and from us. So thank you again to come in today, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.